If you're like me and you've been using the mirrorless camera, like the GH5 or DSLR camera to shoot videos, and now you want to try out the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, there's some things that you should know. Check this out. So for the 15 years that I've been shooting, I've always, like everybody else, I've been wanting to get a video camera or get the video look that looks like the movies, right? I mean, like the Red camera does it, Arri Alexa. There's a lot of other cameras that can shoot RAW that gives you that movie look, but they're super expensive. There's no way I'm gonna spend 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 for those cameras. I just can't afford it. So I've been messing around with LUTs, lenses, vintage lenses, anamorphic adapters, and no matter what, it always just looked like a regular video camera. No matter how good the video was or how good the lighting was, it just never looked like the movie. You could tell the difference. You could just look at it. You don't know why there's a big difference, but there is. Probably the dynamic range, the color science behind it. But anyways, finally, Blackmagic came out with a very affordable $1,300 camera that can shoot RAW and that gives you the movie look, or at least very close to it. Even without color grading or just a slight contrast adjustment, the colors look amazing. So excited for this camera. But I'm so used to shooting mirrorless camera and DSLR that moving to this camera wasn't as easy. If you're used to DSLRs or mirrorless, you could easily jump from a GH5 to a Nikon to a Canon, Sony, and everything is kind of similar. Just the menus are placed in different places, but everything's kind of close. So I never had problems jumping to different cameras. But with this camera, this is strictly a video camera. It looks like a DSLR, but this is made for video and it's a little different. So there was some learning curve, and unlike my GH5 where when I shoot weddings, I could just pop it up, run and gun. And if there's a moment, I could catch it matter of seconds. Whereas this one, you need time to set up at least a minute or two and then get your shot. So maybe it's because I'm not too familiar with it. I mean, I had it ever since it came out, but you know, I'm not as comfortable like my other cameras, right? I've had it for 15 years, but this one still less than a year. But a couple minutes is good enough, you know, to get your shots. And most of the time you shouldn't be rushed anyways. But I do shoot a lot of weddings and events, and there are special moments that, you know, just pops out in a matter of seconds. So that is important. But still a great camera to shoot weddings. And I'll show you some samples to show you how beautiful the sceneries can be. So anyways, there's few things that you need to know that caught me by surprise when I got it, right? So since I was so used to it. First off, I got spoiled with a GH5 and my other mirrorless camera with a body stabilization, and I was able to hold that camera and get that steady shot. But with this guy here, you cannot hold it. I mean, you can, but it's not going to be as steady like the GH5. GH5, I could hold it in my hands, and the stabilization is so good that it looks like it's on a tripod. It's amazing. But this one, the only stabilization it has is if your lens has stabilization. So I do have the GH5 and I do have 3 lenses that has a stabilization built into the lens, and it does work with this camera, but that's just enough to get rid of the micro jitters, but not really enough to get a steady shot, and it doesn't work perfectly. So like for example, some people might not have even caught this, but if you have the 24 to 35 GH5 lens on the camera and you're using the stabilization, you're shooting, and all of a sudden you zoom in, the camera loses that stabilization effect. So you could see the micro jitters happening. So in order for that to kick in, you need to just turn off the lens, the stabilization, and then turn it back on, and then it kicks back on. So this is a micro four third camera, so you don't necessarily get the depth of field, the bokeh, like a full frame would, like the 6K version would. And the 6K version, if you have Canon cameras, get that of course, because that's what it's compatible with. So how I get the depth of field and bokeh comparable to the full frame camera is by using a speed booster. So I have Nikon cameras. And I have a bunch of Nikon lenses, aperture 1.4 and 1.8, and with a speed booster attached to it, Like, you don't even have to get the $400 one. Like, I have a $100 one, and that's just as good. I'm sure if you zoom in a lot closer, maybe there's a difference with a more expensive one, but it's just as good. And if you use those lenses, the Nikon prime lenses with a speed booster, you're basically getting a bokeh and a depth of field comparable to the full frame camera. So don't let bokeh or depth of field discourage you from getting a Micro Four Third. It's still an awesome camera. This camera has dual ISO. So then that means that even at 5,000 ISO, it's just awesome to work with. There's not that much grain. I mean, there's grain, but it's a very usable grain even at 5,000 ISO. So the dual ISO kicks in at 1250. So if you are using an ISO between 800 to 1,000, just jump it up to the next level to 1250 and up. And then the dual ISO kicks in, and then the grain that you could kind of see at 800, 900 disappears. So that's just a little tip that you should know. There are 3 picture profiles for the Blackmagic. There is video, which is closest to just a natural color, but everything is still kind of desaturated. It's not as saturated as like my Nikon camera. When you put on standard mode, everything is super red, right? But it has a very subtle color, but it's the very natural looking color. And then there is extended video, which is a combination, just somewhere in the middle between, very natural color and the flat look. And then there's film, which is the Blackmagic's flat look. Definitely use film. It just looks amazing. But if you are shooting a gig where you don't really want to spend too much time color correcting, just a little bit, and you want to move on, so because you're busy, then use the video mode. All 3 video colors are amazing, so that's good to go. One cool feature that I like about the Blackmagic is that there's a little red light right here, and it turns on when you're recording, like how just a regular video camera would. But our DSLR mirrorless camera, they don't have it, and it kind of sucks when you're a distance away from your camera for whatever reason maybe, and you don't know if your camera is on, so you have to move over there and check the LCD. It's on, you're good to go. You get to then you go back to your other camera. With this camera, with a light being on from a distance, you would know that, okay, the camera is still on, you're good to go. Because for example, with weddings, sometimes when I shoot by myself, I have 3 cameras. One in the center, one facing the bride, one facing the groom. And I kind of just roam around during the ceremony to make sure all 3 cameras are going. Of course, that's a lot nicer if I have an assistant to help me out, right? But some clients don't have the budget, and I still want to get great quality video. So anyways, when I have the Blackmagic in the center, I could see it from a distance that it's recording and it's red, so at least that gives me a little bit of relief knowing that it's on, right? So that's kind of cool. This camera takes in SD cards, and it also takes in a CFast card, but the best part is that it takes in the Samsung SSD drive, the T5 drive, or even any other brand too. But as you can see, I have a little adapter that you can put the SSD drive into and connect it to your camera. Now that's the best method, because you could get a terabyte of SSD drive for about $100, and the speed is amazingly fast. You could shoot at 4K RAW, the highest setting possible, and it'll record no problem. So it's a must to get this adapter and get the SSD drive if you know you're gonna shoot a lot. But even though it has SSD drive and it can shoot 4K and RAW, it can still record all that file into your SD card. Unlike my GH5, if you have a SD card that's too slow or just not that fast, it just won't record it. But even at an average speed SD card, it will record your raw video. But of course, a 120 gigabyte SD card shooting raw, you only get 7 minutes of raw video. So it's of course useless. But if you're shooting HD RAW or ProRes, this SD card is enough. So the white balance in this camera is a little different. It doesn't really have an auto white balance, technically, where like my GH5, you can just set to auto white balance and it'll do its best to get a color as close as possible because you're running and gunning, you don't have time to set it up. But with this one, it gives you the option for you to select the white balance. But the cool little trick that it has is if you hold down the white balance for 3 seconds, it'll pop out a white square on the screen and then find its white balance. And then there you have it. You have your white balance set. So that's important before you shoot, to double check your white balance, since it doesn't have a reliable white balance like my GH5 does. So this camera is best to use an ND filter, like every video camera, right? You want to use an ND filter, set your shutter to 180 degrees. So that way you're just using the ND filter, a variable ND filter, to get the right exposure. And it's kind of tough to get the exposure for me in this camera, because it's got the false color that'll tell you if your subject is in proper exposure or not. But I don't really want to learn that, and I'm not comfortable with it, right? Because I'm so used to, using a waveform. So what I use is I have a small HD monitor that has a little waveform, and I use that dial, just keep it between 20 and 80 IRA, and there you have it. You have proper exposure. Just a quick note, the audio in this thing, it does a decent job capturing audio, but unlike the GH5, it doesn't have a limiter. For my GH5, I turn the limiter on, so if you're at a concert and all of a sudden the speakers are blasting away, it will cap at a limit and you still get great audio. It won't distort the audio. But this one doesn't have a limiter, so you always have to just make sure that your audio setting is at a proper setting. And also, if you're using an external mic, for some reason, it always seems to be a lot less power that's going into, a lot less volume that's going into the camera. So you might want to bump up the adjustment in the back, or bump up your external microphone. Or maybe that's just a way of design, because you obviously you rather have a lower input in the mic than keep it high and all of a sudden it just distorts the audio, and you don't want that, right? The Blackmagic has a little photo button, but don't let that fool you. It's not really meant for photography. It doesn't shoot raw photos or anything like that. It's just to take a JPEG image of your video, basically, maybe for reference, but you can use it for Facebook or social media or things like that. So at least they have it, so that's cool. And lastly, you're gonna need to get yourself an external battery. This Canon battery that it comes with only lasts about 15 minutes, and the camera will stop even if the battery is at like 10-15%. Just to be on the safe side, it'll just stop. So it's definitely not reliable. I don't even know why they even have it. They should have just forget about it, right? So what I use is this NP batteries. They're Sony batteries. They're super cheap, and it has a AC input in there and a USB input, so you could connect that into your camera with a dummy battery. And it does an amazing job. I get about 2 hours, so then all I need is like just a handful of those batteries, only at $30. And you could charge your phone or anything else with those batteries. They're so cheap and so amazing. Like, I don't even know why they even have any other kind of NP batteries. Those are the batteries that you should always just get. They're affordable and, recharges phones and your cameras and, any other devices. So check that out. I'll leave a link to those batteries below if you want to get them. They're dope. Switch out your NP batteries to these. So I could go on forever and talk details of this camera, because there's just so many cool things that it can do and learn. But I want to keep it kind of short as possible. This camera is amazing. If you are interested in shooting short film, movies, or just any good quality video, a little step up from the mirrorless or DSLR cameras, get yourself a Blackmagic camera. It's only $1,300. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.